Today in this video we talk about a mystery that stretches across continents and echoes through the very heart of Malawi. For decades, the official story of the nation's founding father, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, has been held as gospel. What if I told you that the man we thought we knew was nothing more than a meticulously crafted illusion? What if hidden deep within the sun-drenched landscape and vibrant culture of Malawi lies a secret so profound, so audacious, that only a select few truly grasp its magnitude? A secret whispered among certain circles, a truth some claim to possess, but one that the rest of us may just never truly know. Get ready to question everything you thought you knew, because today we are diving headfirst into the mind-bending conspiracy that Dr. Banda of Malawi was actually a man called Richard Armstrong from a different continent altogether. Is it a wild theory or is it a chilling reality? Let's find out. If there is a politician in the history of Malawian politics who absolutely dominated the country's politics like no other before and since then look no further than Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, the late former president and long-time dictator of Malawi, who ruled the country for more than 3 decades with an iron fist. His influence and legacy in Malawi, whether good or bad, depending on how you look at it, will certainly endure forever. He was feared and revered in equal measure. He is long gone now. He died in 1997 in a hospital in South Africa. However, there is a theory which has caused a lot of debate and speculation in the past and still persists today, which theorizes that the former president, Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, was actually an imposter, and that his real name was Richard Armstrong, originally from the United States of America, who took over the persona of the original Kamuzu Banda. Well, that's wild. And Kamuzu Banda did not help himself with these rumors, which were exacerbated by his lifestyle and behavior. He curiously could not speak any of the Malawian languages, not even the main local language of Chichewa, to save his life. He spoke English instead as his primary language.
I've come back home to act as a bridge, to bridge the gulf, G-U-L-F, of disunity between the races, between the Europeans and the Indians on the one hand, and my own people, the Africans of this country, on the other hand.
He never liked Malawi's staple food, and his mannerisms resembled that of an English gentleman or a Western man. This speculation about his deception first surfaced and reached fever pitch in the late 1950s when Dr. Banda first arrived in Malawi from Britain, and then towards the end of his rule and that of one-party state in 1994. So basically, in the beginning, when he first arrived in Malawi, there was this curiosity, who is this gentleman? And then later on, the end of his rule, people were now into multi-party democracy, and he was old and cranberry, did not have the same authority before, he was weak, and that story resurfaced again. Additionally, when Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda passed away in 1996, 2 years and some months after leaving office, at the ripe age of over 100 years old or thereabouts, no one knows really how old Dr. Banda was when he died. Malawians were curious about his feat. For some, the definitive evidence which would confirm or deny the theory of the imposter was in his feet. Well, then the question is, how in the world did Dr. Kamuzu Banda pull this off? The deception of the century, for decades as the feared Malawian dictator? That's a good question. Surprisingly or unsurprisingly, in Africa, many former presidents are dogged by rumors of their origin. Mostly questions revolve around whether they are from the country or they originally came from the neighboring country. Whereas some people are genuinely curious about their leader's background, others use this question as a tool to discredit or decampaign political opponents. Perhaps a case that stands out for me in Southern Africa was that of the long-serving president of Zambia, Kenneth Kaunda. He was the president of Zambia from 1964 till 1991, just short of 30 years. After his presidency, he got into a fight with the president who had succeeded him, that is, the late President Frederick Chiluba. As a result of this back and forth, former President Kaunda announced his intentions to stand for presidency again and get rid of President Chiluba. But President Chiluba was having none of it. He traced former President Kaunda's background and he was subsequently declared persona non grata, an illegal alien in Zambia, as his parents, that is, Kenneth Kaunda's parents, were traced from the neighboring country of Malawi. He was barred from contesting in the presidential elections and was nearly deported back to Malawi. That is wild. Imagine that. I can't imagine ruling a country for 3 decades and then being told that you are not from the country and we are going to deport you. In a funny twist of fate, late former President Chiluba, remember he was on his immediate predecessor's neck, Kaunda's neck, for his Malawian roots. He himself was accused of crossing over the border from his original home of the Democratic Republic of the Congo when he was a toddler. Well, I guess what goes around comes around. So he accuses the former president, Kenneth Kaunda, of not being Zambian, and then in turn, later on, he gets accused of not being Zambian either. That's crazy. That's wild. The late Mugabe was also accused of being Malawian. Again, Malawian. There is a whole story about his roots and a few other leaders on the continent. So Malawi seems to be producing a lot of presidents. These stories should not be surprising given how Africa was partitioned at the infamous Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885, where colonial powers sat down and divided the continent to suit their needs, ignoring rhyme and rhythm of its people. Unfortunately, same tribes and people were separated to form different countries. In a way, the legacy of the Berlin Conference lives on to this day. Why did we not sit down and say, look, this won't work. Let us redefine our borders. I think Kwame Nkrumah was big on it because he is the one who started the concept of Pan-Africanism. He wanted the whole Africa to be one. He started the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, just to advance that agenda, but most of the leaders said no. So then, back to Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, the question of his origins then should not be strange given Africa's history. However, there are many unique angles with Dr. Banda's story. The prevailing theory is that the former president Hastings Kamuzu Banda was an imposter from the USA with some Ghanaian heritage. Now, that's an interesting theory given the distance between these two countries, or rather continents. How does one travel from the USA to impose themselves on the African people in Malawi, somewhere southeast of Africa? That's the question. How can that happen? Hastings Kamuzu Banda was born to Mponongo and Akupingana Banda, farmers of the Chewa tribe of Nyasaland, around 1898. No one really knows when Dr. Banda was born. Some think it was earlier than that. The young Banda took the name Hastings when he was baptized by the Church of Scotland Mission, a Presbyterian group that had been associated with Nyasaland since its formation as a British colony in the late 19th century. Banda later became an elder in the church, and he would adopt many of its moral codes when president of Malawi. A young Hastings Banda was unusually curious, a keen and intelligent student who pursued education from a young age with vigor. According to the official history, when he was around 9 years old, Hastings Banda traveled to southern Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, with his uncle Mr. Msokera. and enrolled at Livingstonia Mission School in southern Rhodesia. That's a long distance for a 9-year-old to travel from Malawi to the neighboring country. He stayed there for a few years before proceeding down to South Africa, the original destination, to find work in Johannesburg at the gold mines. At the time, there was free movement of people between these countries, especially Malawians who traveled by foot from Nyasaland to South Africa for work. This was quite common at that time. Malawi used to supply labor to countries like Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa. So people used to trek from Malawi, just walk to these countries to find work. So this was not uncommon for the time. But what was uncommon was the young age of Dr. Banda. Now, Dr. Banda stood out among the workers for his proficiency in English and writing, so that he worked as a clerk in the gold mines until 1925. His intellect shone in South Africa, and he had come to the notice of Bishop Vernon of the African Methodist Church, who sponsored him so that he could continue his high school education in the United States. He enrolled at the Wilberforce Institute in Ohio, graduating in 1929. His desire was to study medicine, so then he briefly enrolled as a pre-medical student at Indiana University. He finally became a medical student at Meharry Medical College in Tennessee, graduating in 1937. This age is just mind-blowing. Just to follow him up, he left South Africa 1925, so he was around 25, 26 years old, depending on when he was born. And he finished high school, graduating in 1929, or adult school, 1930. So he was 1929. So he almost was around 30 years or early 30s when he finished his high school. That is mind-blowing, because these days people graduate from high school age 16, 17, 18, they're already finished. So just shows how things have changed from then on to now. And Meharry University, I think, is one of those African-American colleges. This particular time at the university is very important for our story today, as it was the beginning of the Richard Armstrong theory. While at the university, Hastings Kamuzu Banda met another student, Richard Armstrong. His father was African American, while his mother was Ghanaian. Richard Armstrong was apparently born in the United States of America. It is said that the two were so close and spent hours and hours exchanging stories, as you do with your best friend. Unfortunately, Kamuzu Banda got ill and he died while a student. He was buried there in the United States of America. Now, this story is addressed in the 1996 book Post-Colonial Identities in Africa, in a book edited by Richard Webner and Terence Ranger, in the chapter entitled Between Kamuzu and God. After Kamuzu Banda died, Richard Armstrong, sensing potential future opportunities for his deceased friend, he took his identity. That's pretty cold. He was now Hastings Banda. After completing his medical school, Richard Armstrong's desire was to return to Africa and practice medicine straight from the USA. But his qualifications would not be recognized in the British colonies, so then he left the United States for the United Kingdom. He did that to study at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons at the University of Edinburgh, Scotland. There he did well and gained his second qualification to practice medicine in 1941. See, there you go now, 1941, so he would have been around 40 plus when he first started practicing as a doctor. Not too bad, actually, not too bad. I mean, these days, the doctors are so young, isn't it? They're like 22, 23. You're like, when did you go to med school again? Richard Armstrong stayed in northern England from 1942 to 1945 practicing medicine. While in the United Kingdom, Richard Armstrong began to meet politically active Africans. From all over Africa, the winds of change were blowing at the time. From now onwards, we will address Richard Armstrong as Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda, so we don't get confused. I mean, after all, that's what he was trying to become, isn't it? Significantly, Kamuzu Banda was invited to join the Nyasaland African Congress, which had just been formed in Nyasaland to fight for the independence of the country. After moving to London from Scotland, Malawians had asked Dr. Banda to represent the Nyasaland African Congress at the 5th Pan-African Congress in Manchester, England, which he did. This was a very famous conference, isn't it? Soon, word spread in Nyasaland of the learned Dr. Banda and his political activism. As nationalism was gaining ground in Africa, the amalgamation of the Federation of the Rhodesia and Nyasaland in 1953 irked the natives. They wanted the colonial powers gone and demanded their countries back. Then the Federation was the amalgamation of the coming together of Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. It was a good idea at the time, but at that time, the thing was nationalism. People wanted their own countries. But, just for ease of business, it just made more sense because Malawi on its own doesn't really work. These three countries would have been stronger together. I think it was just a question of wrong timing. Although Kamuzu Banda was in the UK, he was now popular in Malawi. So that a Malawian delegation of traditional chiefs traveled to the UK to meet with Dr. Banda to officially ask him to return and lead the struggle against the colonial government. This was very trusting of them because they haven't met the man yet, but he was already popular. A bit premature, but I guess for the time he was a physician with his degrees who showed interest in politics, and nothing could go wrong, if you ask that type of person for the time to lead you to independence. So then Kamuzu Banda accepted to retain and lead Malawians to independence as soon as possible. So then the chiefs returned to Malawi and told everyone that Kamuzu Banda would be coming very, very soon. And the country was so excited with anticipation of the imminent arrival of Dr. Banda. For some reason, as Malawians were feverishly expecting Kamuzu Banda to return to Malawi and lead them, he instead went to the Gold Coast, now Ghana, in West Africa, where he opened clinics and practiced medicine from 1954 to 1958, 4 years, leaving Malawians hanging because they were expecting him. I'm baffled by Dr. Banda's reasoning here. I think this was cold. Because remember, people are like, yes, he's coming tomorrow, maybe next week. And he goes to Ghana for 4 years. This trip to Ghana instead of Malawi is suspicious. Just a reminder, remember Richard Armstrong's mom was from Ghana. So I guess it would make sense for Richard to go home to Ghana to see his family. Meanwhile, there is recorded history of Malawians flocking to the airport in their large numbers now and again to receive Dr. Banda after cruel rumors were rife that Dr. Banda had arrived in one of the planes landing in Blantyre, Malawi. Eventually, Dr. Banda went back to Britain from Ghana for a few weeks, and then he left the UK for Malawi on July 6, 1958, after an absence of some 40 years. That is a long time indeed. In his absence, Kamuzu's character was shaped as the Messiah before he even stepped foot in that country, as mentioned before. A powerful, mysterious demagogue, the all-powerful conqueror, and the Lion of Malawi. Dr. Banda's fiery speeches galvanized Malawians as he traveled all over the country in the fight for anti-colonialism. By 1960, Great Britain had accepted the dissolution of the Federation of Rhodesia and Nyasaland, and elections were held in 1961, and Banda's party swept to victory. Though Dr. Banda was just a minister in the colonial interim government, he was the de facto prime minister. Banda officially became the first Malawian Prime Minister in 1964 to 1966, during which time the country declared itself a republic, with Dr. Banda as its first president in 1966, 6th of July. Dr. Banda immediately made Malawi into a one-party state, like several other African countries had done. In 1971, he became the life president and was awarded the title of Ngwazi, which means the Great Lion. This was pretty common with countries who gained independence in the 1960s. They quickly became one-party states. Some of the leaders became life presidents. For example, Kwame Nkrumah did the same in Ghana. Another reason given for his autocratic rule was to preserve the mystical narrative of Kamuzu Banda and to ensure that no one questions him or his background. So it was a bit convenient, but everyone else was doing it. Malawi for 3 decades was an isolated country. He set up organizing the country. Malawians were disciplined and loyal to Kamuzu Banda. No one dared to oppose him, otherwise there would be dire consequences. Opponents were exiled, imprisoned, and in some cases executed. Even those who were in exile, especially in the neighboring countries, they were hounded and executed where they thought they would be safe from Kamuzu. Dr. Banda had paramilitaries which enforced law and order in addition to the army and the police at the family level. Kamuzu Banda was the law. He was Malawi and Malawi was Dr. Banda. He is on record for threatening his opponents multiple times that they would be fed to the crocodiles. Malawians believed that he actually had crocodiles somewhere. As soon as President Banda arrived in Malawi in 1958, he went to work establishing his Malawianness. He identified a small band of collaborators and shot the villagers in Kasungu, the central region of Malawi, as that is where the original Kamuzu Hastings Banda came from. He convinced them, or they were coerced into believing that he was indeed the same Kamuzu Banda that had left the country 40 years before as a child. He identified his sister and 2 step-brothers from the group. From then onwards, Kamuzu Banda's relatives were very well looked after, and they were the richest family in Malawi. They held high positions in government and in the private sector. They had access to the best education. His relatives were living in well-secured privileged compounds. Conspiracy theorists claim that all this was done to ensure that the families stay quiet. All those who did not comply would be thrown into jail. In other aspects, Dr. Kamuzu Banda failed to establish his Malawianness. As mentioned before, he never learned the national language of Chichewa until his death in 1997. He always spoke English and had an interpreter with him translating his speeches wherever he went. This is from the time that he landed after his death. Others allege that he could speak Twi, a Ghanaian language from his mother's ancestral home, but I must say no one ever heard him speak that language Twi. Additionally, Kamuzu Banda confounded his closest friends by refusing to eat nsima, the staple food of the country. I think other Southern African countries call it nchima, pap in South Africa, and other names. He never liked the traditional staple. He preferred other foods. Malawians love the nsima. If you don't eat nsima, questions would be asked. That's a huge red flag. I mean, other Malawians get to a point where they're eating nsima 3 times a day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, it's like, oh my goodness. I mean, it's nice, but not 3 times a day. But that's how some people are dedicated to nsima. So for him not to like it at all is just not a good look. Kamuzu Banda, quote, lived like a white man, end of quote. This was what his nationalist comrade Kanyama Chiume, who later became his enemy and was later exiled for questioning his dictatorial tendencies, once recalled that apparently when he, Kamuzu Banda, first arrived, he was insisting on moving into an area which was declared as a white residential place, and never giving up his famous costume of a 3 three-piece suit, a black Homburg hat, beige raincoat, and brown leather gloves, just like the way he dressed in Britain or the US. Now, Malawi is a tropical country, so it does get hot. Now, if you're dressing like that to the nines every time, it is uncomfortable. I don't know how he got away with it, because from the time he landed, 1958, up until his death, he was always in three-piece suits. No, whether it's hot, whether it's cold, oh man, he just won't get out of those. And the funny thing about Kamuzu Banda, I recall once he was teasing the president of Zambia that he always wore safari suits. Like, he never changed. And I was like, you don't change either. I mean, at least Kenneth Kaunda, that at that time, he wore safari suits all the time, but they did look very comfortable for him. And, it's something that you would get away with it in the heat, or whether it's cold, just put something on top, but not Dr. Banda's. But yeah, that was funny, I thought. Kamuzu Banda's diplomatic policies were not typically nationalist. Well, maybe that's an understatement of the year, honestly, because Malawi was the only independent African country to openly have friendly ties with apartheid South Africa. And as a result, Kamuzu Banda did not see eye to eye with anti-colonial nationalist leaders such as Julius Nyerere of Tanzania or Samora Machel of Mozambique. Or I would say he had a lukewarm relationship with President Mugabe of Zimbabwe. When President Kamuzu Banda died in 1997 in South Africa, these were the thoughts of the South African icon, late President Nelson Mandela. He acknowledged that Dr. Banda did not have a very good reputation because of his support of the old apartheid regime, but then he had redeemed himself through his subsequent generosity, personally sending him a large sum of money following Mandela's release from prison, without him asking for it. I guess he was trying to make amends. He's like, well, he's out. He's going to be the president of South Africa. I better send Mandela something. And then when he did ask for contributions on behalf of the African National Congress, Banda had responded magnificently. So that would have been millions of dollars, wouldn't it? Now, let's get back to our last question, which is what happened to his toes? Those who knew the real Kamuzu Banda allege that he was born with some toes missing. So when Kamuzu Banda died, the autopsy revealed that he had all his 10 toes. However, the great reveal did not grab the headlines. I think deep down in most Malawian hearts, they had resigned themselves to the fact that Dr. Hastings Kamuzu Banda's story was rather inspirational, or that his history was legendary. Just imagine a boy from Nyasaland who dreamed so big and somehow made it to the USA and the UK via South Africa, became a medical doctor and retained to save his country from the Europeans, and adequately laid the foundations for its development. It is an unbelievable story. By the time he died, Malawians had seemingly moved on from the Lion of Malawi and were excited with the new government in a multi-party state. So they were not paying attention to this theory anymore. The country had opened up, there were new radio stations, the first TV station was being established, and most importantly, Malawians felt free. However, nearly 30 years after his death, there are people in their 30s who were born after he left power. The stories of Kamuzu are now rather legendary. And as for the country, instead of building on what Richard Armstrong or Kamuzu Banda left, seemingly has gone backwards, so that Kamuzu Banda's or Richard Armstrong's era is remembered with nostalgia. There are a lot of Malawians who say they were better off under the dictatorship than the successive corrupt democratic governments which have governed the country since Kamuzu Banda was kicked out in 1994. So that is the story of Kamuzu Banda. I thank you for watching Afro Stories and more. I'll see you in my next video when we will bring you another mind-blowing story. Peace. I'm out.